Reyes, what is your position?
I am the AIDS health educator for the state of New Mexico, although I was the only one for the first year of the grant. I now have a coworker who's in the studios with us by the name of Lorenzo Olivas. It appears that we'll probably be splitting the state. Initially, I covered the entire state as the AIDS health educator.
Okay, and as a health educator for New Mexico, what is your mission?
My mission is to educate as many of the 1.4 million New Mexicans as possible. It's quite an undertaking. It was real funny when we hired my coworker on board. My boss says, "Oh, you don't have to educate the 1.4 million. Now you can educate 0.7 million."
Okay. What exactly do you want to do? Are you educating them on venereal diseases or on AIDS specifically?
One thing I want to point out is that there are a lot of common goals when you're talking about AIDS. There's a lot of overlap with sexually transmitted diseases. There's a lot of overlap with contraception goals and objectives, because certainly condoms do more than just protect from AIDS. Also, there's some common goals with substance abuse issues. So one thing that AIDS is doing is it's pulling a lot of allied health professionals together.
Who are the highest risk groups?
That's a real great question. I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to address that. We at the State Health Department don't focus on risk groups any longer. The real issue here is risk behavior, regardless of who's doing it. Risk behavior is the real issue, and risk groups really tend to isolate out certain segments of populations. And the reality is anyone who puts themselves in a position of engaging in risky sexual or drug behaviors can contract this disease regardless of, who they are.
Okay. Well then, since you're dealing with the general public, how do you suggest that they keep themselves from becoming one of those risk groups or behavior?
Basically, our recommendation is the first step is everybody needs to become educated. They need to know the facts. They need to know what AIDS is, what acquired immune deficiency related complex is, or ARC, AIDS-related complex. They need to know what the healthy carrier state means. Now, all of those are components of the overall problem, because AIDS itself is not the real issue. The AIDS virus is. So we're talking about a lot more people than people who are deathly ill. We're talking about healthy carriers. Nobody knows who those folks are, and oftentimes those people don't know who they are. Another key concept is how the disease is transmitted, how it's not transmitted, and how it can be prevented. The three modes of transmission that have repeatedly come out in all the research are sexual transmission, IV drug use, and mothers spreading it to babies. So we need to address each of those issues. When we talk about sexual prevention, we're talking about all of the choices: abstinence, monogamy between two non-infected partners, and safer sex guidelines, which incorporate the use of condoms and barrier methods. When we talk about drugs, we talk about IV drug use, and specifically we talk about the fact that people need to quit using them. Now, that's really fine advice. People should seek help, seek treatment to get off of drugs and get off of needles. But some people are not going to take that good advice, so we have to follow it up with the recommendation that if you continue to use drugs, at least don't share your needles and your syringes, your works. The other recommendation that follows that, because some people are going to continue to use and continue to share, would be disinfect your works. And that's easily accomplished by flushing the needle, syringe, and everything with straight chlorine bleach twice, and then flushing it with water twice. That will remove the AIDS virus particles from the syringe and needle and so forth.
I see. Okay, and what is your specific message for the population here, the student population in MSU?
Okay, great. I'm glad I'm getting all these wonderful questions and these wonderful opportunities. My first message is become educated, know the facts, and then act accordingly. Protect yourselves. You don't know who's got the virus and who doesn't. Therefore, what you choose to do with seemingly healthy people is going to make a difference in whether or not you contract a potentially fatal disease. The other thing I want to point out is that people need to choose one of those recommendations about sexual prevention. They need to choose abstinence, monogamy between two non-infected partners, or safer sex guidelines, which incorporate limiting sex partners, using condoms, that sort of thing. And the other thing I want to point out is I don't get the impression that there's a lot of IV drug needle use here at New Mexico State, but a lot of people drink a fair amount of beer, Jack Daniels, and use other drugs, and smoke pot, a number of other substance abusing behaviors. A lot of people don't put that connection together, but there is a direct connection between alcohol and drug use, not using needles, and sexuality. And that sexuality connection now is extended to AIDS as well. So what I'm trying to say here is, they wouldn't write country western songs about the girls getting prettier at closing time at the bar if there wasn't some validity to it. So we really need to face that reality that when people use and abuse drugs, they may put themselves in certain situations, sexual situations, that could put them at risk. Not only that, but certain chemicals, particularly alcohol, pot, cocaine, and speed, amphetamines, those four chemical substances on their own are immunosuppressive. So they kind of lower the person's resistance to any germs while they're under the influence, so that if they do get in a situation where they have sexual contact with an infected person, they're more likely to develop infection as a result of that exposure. So I think the real important key here is get educated and then act responsibly, because each and every person in this state, in our society, has a personal role and a personal responsibility in this epidemic by the choices that they make.
What would you say is the estimate of people in New Mexico as a whole, or even in Las Cruces, who have AIDS?
Okay, who have AIDS or have the AIDS virus?
AIDS virus.
Okay. Again, the real issue here is the AIDS virus. We estimate that in New Mexico there's probably between 3,400 and 6,800 virus carriers. In Las Cruces, or in the Doña Ana County, Dr. Chris Urbina, who presented with me yesterday here on campus, actually stated that based on anecdotal reporting information as well as testing data and so forth, that probably in Doña Ana County there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 500 healthy carriers that are capable of passing the disease on. So I do want to let the student population, faculty, and everybody here know the virus is here, and the only way to protect yourself is to incorporate the prevention recommendations into your life. The sooner the better. Now, some people may be concerned about past behavior. They're willing to make the behavior change now and to protect themselves now, but they're sitting there saying, wow, I had sex with, a number of different people, and I don't know who they were with and everything else. Maybe I'm infected. Maybe I should find out. Maybe I need to at least know I'm not positive so that I can get on with my life and make these positive behavior changes without carrying this fear around with me. And for students, faculty, or any citizens in this area who want to get free and anonymous testing, they can go to the Public Health Department here in Doña Ana County for specific hours and times when they can get this test. They can call 526-6617 and speak to someone there about the AIDS antibody test or HIV test.
Okay, as far as healthy carriers of the virus, what do you mean by healthy carriers, and how long will it be before the AIDS virus becomes, a big part of their lives or a big dilemma?
Okay, that's a real interesting question. What we have noted since the beginning of the epidemic is we've noted some people that contract the virus remain healthy for years, and we don't know how long they're going to stay healthy carriers. But some people, and it's estimated 50% at this point, will progress up and develop AIDS within 5 to 10 years after catching it. And AIDS, of course, is the deadly form of the disease. That's what typically kills people in 2 years or less. Once they've progressed to that point, their immune system is really severely damaged and they have a very short lifespan, very poor prognosis. What we've seen is, in fact, the majority of AIDS cases from the time the doctor says you've got AIDS until the time that they actually die is generally 2 years or less in this country. The healthy carriers, again, some of those, maybe half of those, will progress up and develop AIDS in 5 to 10 years after catching the virus. And then the remaining half is yet to be seen. We don't know if it's going to take 15, 20, 30, 50 years for them to ultimately develop the fatal form. We don't have all those answers yet, because do bear in mind that we're talking about an epidemic that was first recognized in 1981, so we've only been studying it and researching it for the last 6 years. So we don't know all of the long-term implications of this virus yet.
What are some of the symptoms?
Okay, what does happen with some people is they move on from the healthy carrier state and they do start to develop some signs and symptoms. Typically, those are non-specific signs and symptoms. What I mean by that is they're real common signs and symptoms of a lot of different illnesses. It may include unexplained weight loss, swollen glands in the neck, under the arms, in the groin, night sweats, low-grade fevers, fatigue, chronic diarrhea. Some people have persistent cough, sore throat, skin manifestations. It varies from person to person. Now, those sound like real common signs and symptoms, and some of your listening audience, during flu season may have had some of those. And what I want to point out is that when a person has those signs and symptoms, or any of those signs and symptoms, for 2 weeks or longer, they really need to see a doctor and they need to get it checked out.
Okay. Do you think that the Las Cruces population, specifically because it's a student population, would be more at risk? Because maybe students are more sexually active than older folks?
Well, having gone to college myself a few years back, I would venture to say that it's a highly sexually active population. And for that reason, yes, I think that there is a great deal of risky behavior that's probably occurring among students. And I think what's happening is I think more and more people are starting to learn and trying to modify behavior. But let's face it, sexual behaviors are tough to change, particularly if a person's been doing them for a long period of time. The longer a person's been doing it, the harder it is to change, just like any other habit. But it's life and death. One thing I do want to say is more and more people are trying to modify their behaviors around the country and in the state out of this new awareness and this newfound knowledge. There's a lot of young people, teenagers and young adults, who are real angry. They're real resentful because they have to deal with something that no one else has had to deal with. And so there's a great deal of anger and resentment in some of our teen and young adult populations. The reality is a lot of us were pretty dumb about decisions and stuff when we were in college a few years back. I won't count how many. We were pretty dumb about some of our decisions, but those decisions wouldn't cost us our lives. And that's the reality that young people and young adults are dealing with now.
What kind of audience response have you had at your seminars? Do you think they're taking this AIDS issue as seriously as they should be? Do you think they're really starting to use condoms, or do you think they're just saying, yeah?
I think it varies, but for the most part, I think people are listening, and that's the first obstacle, is getting people at least to listen to the messages. Some of the audience have very responsible people in them. I present not just to the general public, but I also present to a great deal of professional people.
AIDS is creating a worldwide emergency, says the World Health Organization. As of June 1st, over 51,000 cases of AIDS from 113 countries have been reported to the World Health Organization. Worldwide, WHO estimates that 5 to 10 million people are already infected with the AIDS virus. There will be 3 million new cases of AIDS by 1991. Donald Hopkins of the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta says the public needs to know how AIDS can be controlled.
I greatly value what the media has done in helping to bring the seriousness of this problem and ways that people need to respond to it to the attention of American people and other people around the world. I cringe, though, and just get very frustrated when I see really what I can best call a sideshow. There are things which people really do need to be worried about in connection with this disease, with their sexual practices, with IV drug abuse, and things like that. They do not need to be worried about some waiter who they think may be gay or some food that they've been served.
The World Health Organization has launched a worldwide publicity campaign to help stop the spread of AIDS. Special posters have been designed to get the public's attention. The first to be issued shows two red hearts that converge in a blue fright mask with the slogan, "AIDS, a worldwide effort will stop it." WHO is also developing a brochure for travelers on the dangers of the disease. A World Summit of Health Ministers Against AIDS will be held in London in January 1988. You have been listening to New Voices. This program is produced by the Public Interest Video Network in Washington, D.C.
Funding is provided by foundations and by educational nonprofit organizations, including the Union of Concerned Scientists for coverage of science and national security, and the World Federalist Association for coverage of global institutions and the United Nations system. The content is the sole responsibility of the producers.
Our theme was performed by Bob McCoy. Additional music was provided by Bob Hirschfeld. Our engineer was Deanie Henson. Special thanks to Debbie Merton for technical assistance. Our Director of Program Development is Pamela Westfall-Rosen.
Coming up next week, coverage of special awards given to members of Congress for their contributions to a safe energy policy. Plus, political leaders from around the world speak out on the Geneva Peace Talks.
If you would like to comment on New Voices, write to us at New Voices, Box 21500, Calorama Station, Washington, D.C. 20009. I'm Rosetta Robinson.
We do hope you will write. Our address again is New Voices, Box 21500, Calorama Station, Washington, D.C. 20009. For New Voices, I'm Patrick Esmond White.